Behind the glamorous facades of British show business, from the swinging 60s to the turbulent 90s, lay secrets that society was simply not ready to hear. Today, we uncover the truth about 10 iconic stars who engaged in highly unconventional romantic arrangements, willingly sharing their partners and living in deeply complex emotional triangles. What drove these beloved figures into such tangled webs of passion and heartbreak? Share your thoughts on these unusual relationships in the comments below, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel before we dive into these incredible untold stories. George Harrison. The quiet member of the most famous band in history was always perceived as the spiritual and deeply philosophical soul of the group. However, behind this tranquil and mystical public image lay a man entangled in one of the most complicated and heartbreaking romantic webs of the 20th century. The cultural revolution of the 1960s brought a wave of liberation, but for this legendary British guitarist, it meant the boundaries of love, loyalty, and friendship became dangerously blurred. His marriage to a prominent fashion model was initially viewed as the ultimate rock and roll fairy tale. Yet, as the pressures of unprecedented global fame grew, alongside his intense spiritual journeys to distant lands, a profound emotional distance developed between the couple. It was during this vulnerable period that his closest companion, another monumental figure in British rock music, developed a consuming and desperate infatuation with his beautiful wife, leading to a strange dynamic. Instead of reacting with the fierce jealousy one might expect, the spiritual musician adopted a shockingly passive and accommodating stance. The atmosphere within their opulent estates became incredibly bohemian, reflecting the free love ethos of the era. Rumors circulated widely that the concept of traditional ownership in relationships was entirely discarded among their elite circle. They essentially allowed their lives to merge into a deeply unconventional and emotionally taxing arrangement. The tension reached its peak during an infamous evening at their mansion, which culminated in an actual musical duel. The two legendary guitarists sat opposite each other, playing their instruments with fierce intensity, while the woman they both loved was left to make a seemingly impossible choice. Despite the heartbreak, the original husband essentially stepped aside, giving his blessing for his best friend to take his place, an act of emotional surrender that shocked the entire music industry. But the complicated geometry of his love life did not end there. In a stunning twist that further complicated the dynamic of his legendary band, he became intimately involved with the wife of his own drummer. This shocking betrayal within the band's inner circle proved that the philosophical approach to shared love often masked deep personal pain and confusion. The utopian ideals of the 1960s were slowly unraveling, leaving behind broken hearts and incredibly fractured relationships. Ultimately, his first wife formally moved on to marry his best friend in the late 1970s. Yet, in a testament to the truly bizarre nature of their shared history, the two men remained extraordinarily close. The original husband even attended their wedding reception, happily referring to himself as the husband-in-law. This remarkable ability to forgive, or perhaps a fundamental detachment from traditional emotional bonds, cements his story as a fascinating chapter of rock history.
Keith Richards.
Stepping into the tumultuous world of rock royalty, we find a legendary guitarist whose life was defined by rebellious riffs and incredibly messy romantic entanglements. During the height of the British invasion in the 1960s, the concept of boundaries was entirely foreign to him and his bandmates. The group operated more like a chaotic family, where everything from clothing to romantic partners was seemingly considered communal property, leading to deep and lasting emotional scars. The most defining and destructive triangle of his early career involved the brilliant but deeply troubled founder of his own band. This enigmatic founder had brought a breathtaking European actress and model into their immediate inner circle. She was an absolute force of nature, radiating an intoxicating energy that captivated everyone in her orbit. However, the original partner became increasingly unstable, creating a dark and toxic environment that inevitably pushed his beautiful muse away. Sensing her profound distress during a harrowing road trip across the European continent, our rebellious guitarist swooped in to rescue her from the rapidly deteriorating situation. This was not merely a brief betrayal, but the beginning of a complex, 12-year-long partnership. Yet, the transition was far from clean. The three of them remained completely entangled, living in a constant state of emotional warfare. The abandoned founder was left absolutely devastated and utterly heartbroken. Even as he established a growing family with this striking woman, the heavy shadow of their wildly unconventional lifestyle loomed large. The boundaries of their commitment were tested repeatedly, most notably when the band's charismatic lead singer was cast alongside her in a provocative independent film. The lines between acting and reality blurred entirely, sparking intense rumors of a secret romance. Instead of leaving, the guitarist chose to accept the situation with a weary resignation. To exact revenge against his lead singer's blatant overstepping, he famously embarked on a brief but highly publicized liaison with the singer's own beautiful romantic partner. This retaliatory behavior transformed their entire social circle into a convoluted web of shifting loyalties and shared affections. They existed in a bizarre emotional greenhouse where traditional fidelity was openly mocked, yet the sting of betrayal was still keenly felt. It was a deeply unhealthy and dramatic ecosystem. Ultimately, this highly turbulent chapter finally closed, leaving a long trail of profound heartbreak and entirely shattered trust in its wake. While the incredible music they created during this chaotic period remains completely immortal, the actual human cost of their bohemian experiment was staggering to witness. The guitarist eventually sought genuine stability, stepping away from the chaotic romantic triangles. It remains a haunting reminder that absolute freedom carries a very heavy price. David Bowie. A true chameleon of the stage, this pioneering artist completely reinvented the concept of identity during the dazzling era of the 1970s. This radical and entirely fearless approach extended deeply into his very domestic life. By marrying a fiercely independent and equally provocative woman, he forged a powerful alliance that openly mocked traditional vows. Their stylish London home rapidly became the absolute epicenter of a new, highly experimental and sharing bohemian movement. From the very beginning of their union, they firmly established an entirely open marital arrangement. Both husband and wife actively encouraged each other to pursue thrilling external passions, frequently sharing their romantic conquests in a startlingly casual manner. This was never a shameful secret, kept carefully hidden behind closed doors, but rather a loudly broadcast lifestyle choice. They actively sought to shock polite British society with their loudly declared emotional freedom. However, the harsh emotional reality of living with such absolute and unbridled freedom soon proved to be incredibly destructive. Existing within an endless carousel of shared partners inevitably created a deeply unstable and terribly competitive atmosphere inside their household. The wife would often actively scout for beautiful companions to bring back to their mutual living space, viewing this process as a wonderfully twisted demonstration of her absolute loyalty and unwavering dedication. The most infamous and widely discussed incident from this incredibly chaotic era involved another towering and legendary figure of the British music scene. The wife famously claimed to have returned to their grand London residence only to discover her flamboyant husband closely entwined with the highly charismatic lead singer of a massive rock band. Instead of reacting with predictable outrage, she reportedly simply offered them a morning beverage, perfectly summarizing their bizarre pact. As the turbulent decade progressed and the immense pressure of global superstardom intensely magnified, The deep cracks in their open arrangement became entirely impossible to ignore. The constant, dizzying presence of transient companions and the heavy psychological toll of their extreme artistic lifestyle deeply fractured their foundational bond. The musical genius, desperately seeking an escape from the chaotic emotional labyrinth he had helped construct, began to crave genuine stability. Ultimately, this grand and highly publicized experiment in free love totally collapsed under the heavy weight of its own emotional contradictions. The avant-garde couple went through a remarkably bitter and highly destructive separation at the dawn of the 1980s, clearly proving that even the most progressive minds struggle with heartbreak. The legendary chameleon eventually found lasting peace in a highly traditional second marriage, closing the door on his wild and sharing past. John Lennon. Stepping away from the conventional paths of romance, the brilliant and often controversial founder of the greatest band in British history found himself navigating a deeply unusual domestic setup during the 1970s. While his legendary creative partnership with his avant-garde second wife is celebrated as a monumental union of minds, the hidden truth of their domestic reality was far more complex. It was a bizarre dynamic artificially orchestrated to save a rapidly failing emotional bond. As the heavy pressures of global fame and their shared political activism began to severely fracture their connection, the marital atmosphere grew unbearably suffocating. The avant-garde couple faced a profound emotional crisis that threatened to entirely destroy their legendary partnership. In a move that profoundly shocked even their most bohemian contemporaries, the deeply controlling wife decided to actively manage her restless husband's deep unhappiness by proposing an utterly radical solution. Instead of facing a traditional separation or enduring painful secret betrayals, she effectively hand-picked a beautiful and trusted young assistant from their immediate staff to become his official companion. This was not a hidden affair, but a fully authorized and thoroughly managed romantic delegation. The young assistant was officially instructed to accompany the legendary musician to the sunny western coast of the United States, initiating a bizarre 18-month period of creative exile. This turbulent era quickly became widely known as his Lost Weekend, characterized by highly erratic behavior. Throughout this incredibly bizarre arrangement, the famous wife remained firmly in control from the other side of the country. She frequently called the new couple to issue strict instructions and maintain her absolute psychological authority over the entire situation. The legendary musician, caught between two vastly different women, lived in a state of profound emotional confusion. He publicly flaunted his genuinely affectionate partner, finding a brief sense of youthful freedom, yet he remained desperately tethered to the powerful influence of his absent spouse. The young companion found herself acting as a frantic caretaker, trying to manage a volatile superstar while being forced to report back to the very woman she had temporarily replaced. It was an incredibly toxic and deeply unhealthy environment that placed an immense psychological burden on everyone involved. Eventually, the grand orchestrator of this deeply unconventional romantic experiment simply decided it was time to swiftly end the arrangement. She effortlessly summoned her famous husband back to their grand apartment building. He returned immediately, without hesitation, abruptly terminating the young assistant's journey. She was left entirely heartbroken, discarded the moment her purpose was fulfilled. This chapter remains a testament to the highly manipulative nature of their famous love story. Ronnie Wood. Entering the incredibly vibrant and heavily intoxicated world of 1970s rock and roll, we encounter a flamboyant British guitarist whose legendary lifestyle perfectly mirrored the absolute chaos of the era. Before he formally joined the ranks of the most enduring rock band in history, he was already famous for his wildly unpredictable domestic life. He and his beautiful first wife entirely abandoned any traditional concepts of fidelity, openly inviting massive emotional disaster. The absolute pinnacle of their bizarre bohemian behavior occurred when they orchestrated an utterly astonishing partner exchange with a profoundly famous, spiritually minded musician from a rival legendary group. Because their elite social circles constantly overlapped in wealthy London neighborhoods, a highly unnatural closeness developed between the couples. Rather than hiding their wandering affections, the two musicians formally agreed to openly swap their spouses for an extended period. This entirely surreal romantic arrangement involved coordinating international travel and sharing magnificent luxury estates. The flamboyant guitarist casually allowed his young wife to jet off to a sun-drenched European paradise with his deeply famous friend. Simultaneously, he warmly welcomed the friend's exquisitely beautiful but deeply unhappy wife into his own arms. They genuinely believed they were pioneering a highly enlightened form of love, completely immune to standard human jealousy. However, the harsh emotional reality of this deeply unnatural experiment quickly proved to be overwhelmingly destructive. What had initially started as a thrillingly rebellious game rapidly mutated into a terrifying swamp of deep resentment and profound insecurity. The flamboyant musician brutally discovered that while physical boundaries could be easily erased, the complex architecture of the human heart cannot be safely ignored. Genuine and heavy emotional attachments unexpectedly blossomed. When the incredibly misguided holiday finally concluded and the couples attempted to resume their previous lives, the terrible weight of their shared experiences made normal existence absolutely impossible. The atmosphere within their lavish home turned extraordinarily bitter and suffocating. The unwritten rules of their casual arrangement had been severely broken, as his own wife had fallen deeply under the spell of her temporary companion, leaving the original marriage completely hollowed out. Ultimately, this wildly arrogant attempt to completely rewrite the rules of romance destroyed his first marriage entirely before the close of the 1970s. The incredibly talented guitarist eventually moved forward, seeking new thrills and establishing his permanent legacy on the global stage. Yet, his willingness to actively trade his partner remains a profoundly cautionary tale from a highly confused decade. It proves that treating love as a shared commodity guarantees immense pain. Eric Clapton. Delving into the profound obsession that defined an era of British blues, we find a legendary guitar god whose personal life was entirely consumed by a tragic and desperate infatuation. During the late 1960s and early 1970s, this celebrated musician fell hopelessly under the spell of a stunning fashion model who was already legally bound to his absolute best friend. This was not a fleeting crush, but a devastating emotional storm that completely derailed his existence. Because the two legendary musicians were as close as brothers, frequently collaborating and spending endless hours in each other's magnificent country estates, he was constantly forced into close proximity with the woman he desperately desired. He became a permanent fixture in their glamorous household, essentially living as a third member of their deeply complicated and painfully tense domestic arrangement. He watched their marital struggles from the front row while silently suffering in agony. Unable to contain his overwhelming feelings, the tortured blues legend resorted to dramatic and highly unconventional declarations of his burning adoration. He famously poured all of his agonizing pain into creating a monumental and historic concept album, a screaming musical testament to his unrequited passion. He frequently orchestrated secret meetings with her, relentlessly begging the beautiful muse to abandon her famous husband and escape into a new life with him, risking everything he had.
The situation reached a genuinely unbelievable climax during a legendary gathering at the couple's lavish Southern English home. The desperate bluesman openly declared his profound love for the model right in front of his musical brother. Instead of being thrown out into the cold night, the deeply spiritual husband engaged him in a literal guitar duel in the living room.
It was a profoundly absurd and intensely dramatic theatrical display of shared affection, rivalry, and bohemian bizarre rules. When the beautiful model initially refused to abandon her failing marriage, the devastated guitarist plunged into a profoundly dark abyss, disappearing from the public eye for 3 agonizing years of dangerous habits. However, the spiritual husband's own increasingly erratic behavior and constant stream of temporary companions eventually eroded his original marriage. In an astonishing twist, the first husband eventually gave his full blessing, actively encouraging his friend to take his place. The tortured blues musician and the famous model finally married in the late 1970s, closing one of the most astonishing romantic triangles in modern entertainment history. Astonishingly, the original husband happily attended their grand wedding celebration, jokingly referring to himself as the husband-in-law to the gathered press. This completely surreal level of mutual acceptance perfectly highlights the incredibly blurred lines of loyalty that dominated this fascinating period. Mick Jagger. Standing at the very forefront of the global cultural revolution, the endlessly energetic lead singer of the most dangerous rock band in the world completely redefined modern romance. For this incredibly charismatic British icon, the standard rules of loyalty were viewed as outdated constraints meant only for ordinary people. Throughout the turbulent late 1960s and the decadent 1970s, his grand domestic life functioned as an extravagant and highly theatrical open house. During his celebrated and highly publicized partnership with a beautifully tragic aristocratic singer in the late 1960s, the couple established a deeply sophisticated but profoundly perilous romantic arrangement. They resided in a magnificent London residence that quickly became a notorious haven for boundary-pushing behavior. It was an environment where inviting highly attractive strangers and close friends into their most intimate domestic space was considered remarkably normal. This profoundly casual attitude towards emotional fidelity inevitably created deep fractures within his own musical brotherhood. The incredibly complex web of shared companions reached a terrifying peak when he famously engaged in a highly secretive liaison with the fiercely intelligent and captivating partner of his own lead guitarist. This was not a simple mistake, but a calculated display of power and an extension of their deeply bohemian philosophy that treated love as a communal asset. As the flamboyant decade shifted into the 1970s, the legendary frontman elevated his profoundly unconventional lifestyle by marrying a strikingly elegant and fiercely independent international socialite. Together, they conquered the most exclusive venues of New York and London, deliberately projecting the image of a thoroughly modern union. They actively maintained a highly publicized, open arrangement where both spouses loudly pursued and paraded their glamorous external romances. However, beneath the dazzling surface of their jet-setting existence, a deeply chilling emotional detachment began to take root. Their marriage slowly mutated into a highly toxic and competitive psychological game of romantic one-upmanship. The lavish household became incredibly crowded, with a constantly rotating cast of beautiful but temporary companions. Instead of providing ultimate freedom, this bizarre marital geometry created a profoundly suffocating atmosphere of relentless insecurity. Ultimately, the heavy and exhausting burden of sustaining such a magnificent but entirely hollow romantic structure caused his celebrated marriage to completely shatter by the end of the decade. The incredibly glamorous facade simply could not hide the profound loneliness that inevitably stems from a life utterly devoid of genuine emotional grounding. The globally adored singer eventually moved away from these highly destructive triangles, leaving behind a legacy of deeply broken hearts. Brian Jones. At the very dawn of the British invasion, a brilliant, rebellious, and tragically beautiful multi-instrumentalist stood at the absolute epicenter of London's swinging 1960s. As the original visionary and absolute heart behind a famously dangerous rock band, his stunningly fast rise to global prominence was perfectly mirrored by his incredibly chaotic domestic life. He possessed an almost supernatural magnetism that effortlessly drew the most beautiful women and deeply complicated situations into his orbit. His most intense, deeply celebrated, and ultimately devastating romantic entanglement involved an absolutely captivating European actress and aristocratic model. She was a true bohemian muse, radiating an exotic and fiercely independent spirit that perfectly complemented his own wildly eccentric persona. Together, they rapidly formed the most striking and dangerous power couple in the British music scene, living an entirely unrestrained and incredibly decadent existence in their grand city residence. However, beneath the dazzling surface of their beautifully tailored clothing and highly publicized social outings, their domestic reality was a profoundly dark and terrifying emotional battlefield. The brilliantly talented musician was notoriously erratic, frequently plunging into entirely dark and aggressive moods that severely tested his partner's profound devotion. This intense and highly toxic dynamic soon began to attract the deep concern of his incredibly close musical brother and fellow bandmate. During a harrowing and deeply dramatic road trip across the European continent in the late 1960s, the fragile architecture of their wildly chaotic relationship completely collapsed. As the brilliant founder fell deeply into one of his darkest and most frightening episodes, his incredibly beautiful muse found herself completely abandoned in a state of profound distress. It was precisely in this terrifyingly vulnerable moment that his closest friend and legendary guitarist swooped in to offer protection. Instead of fiercely attempting to reclaim his beautiful partner or forcefully banishing his closest friend from his inner circle, the original visionary fell into a state of profound and devastating shock. He essentially lost the woman he loved the most to the man he considered his absolute musical brother. The three of them remained completely entangled in a deeply horrifying and entirely unnatural emotional triangle that rapidly drained the final reserves of his incredibly fragile spirit. Ultimately, the heavy psychological toll of this agonizing and profoundly humiliating loss proved to be entirely overwhelming for the brilliant visionary. The agonizing reality of constantly facing his former partner, intensely engaged with his closest friend, deeply fractured his soul. He was eventually ousted from the very band he had brilliantly created, spiraling tragically into the darkness of the late 1960s. This devastating romantic triangle remains one of the darkest chapters in modern music history. Ringo Starr. Often seen as the affable and endlessly easygoing timekeeper of the most revolutionary musical quartet in history, this beloved British musician seemed to thoroughly embody domestic stability. During the chaotic and heavily experimental era of the late 1960s, he maintained a seemingly traditional family life with his charming childhood sweetheart. However, as the legendary band slowly disintegrated, the poisonous culture of absolutely free boundaries violently breached his own peaceful sanctuary. The absolute and devastating betrayal came not from a random stranger, but from his deeply spiritual and philosophical bandmate. Their musical brotherhood had always been incredibly tight, with the two families frequently spending enormous amounts of time at each other's magnificent country estates. This profound closeness unfortunately created a deeply suffocating and highly dangerous domestic overlap. His beautiful wife slowly found herself entirely entangled in an incredibly secretive romantic liaison. Instead of remaining a completely fleeting moment of absolute weakness, This astonishing betrayal rapidly developed into an incredibly complex and heavily agonizing emotional triangle. The deeply philosophical guitarist brazenly declared his intense affection for the drummer's wife in front of everyone during a highly tense and profoundly awkward gathering. The incredibly affable percussionist was utterly paralyzed by this shocking revelation, trapped between his marriage and his legendary musical brother. For a deeply painful and highly prolonged period, the traditional boundaries within their elite social circle completely dissolved into absolute chaos. The profound absurdity of the entire situation peaked when the drummer was essentially forced to navigate a profoundly unnatural domestic arrangement, witnessing his closest friend actively pursuing his spouse. The heavy psychological burden of this dark bohemian experiment absolutely devastated the normally jovial musician, plunging him into profound despair. Desperately attempting to somehow salvage his profoundly fractured pride, the legendary timekeeper tried to actively adopt the incredibly toxic and freewheeling lifestyle that had entirely infected his closest friends. He hastily engaged in his own highly publicized external romances, desperately attempting to create a completely false illusion of mutual emotional freedom. Yet, this incredibly destructive coping mechanism only further widened the devastating emotional chasm within his completely broken marriage. Ultimately, the incredibly heavy weight of these profound internal betrayals forced the deeply unhappy couple into a highly painful and highly publicized separation right in the middle of the 1970s. The legendary drummer eventually found genuine peace and absolute stability with a beautifully talented international actress, firmly closing the heavy door on the wildly toxic and fiercely incestuous era of his youth. His highly painful journey remains a powerful and deeply moving cautionary tale. Jimmy Page. Stepping into the incredibly dark and heavily mystical realm of 1970s heavy rock, we find the absolute mastermind behind Britain's most phenomenally successful musical export. While his legendary band completely conquered the global charts with their thunderous sound, his deeply secretive domestic life was an entirely different kind of absolute chaos. He fully embraced the completely boundaryless culture of the era, where the traditional concepts of romance were utterly discarded. The most notoriously complicated and deeply unnatural romantic triangle of his incredible career involved the beautiful wife of another famously flamboyant British guitarist. While that other celebrated musician was deeply entangled in his own completely bizarre partner exchanges with a spiritual friend, his profoundly neglected spouse sought passionate refuge. She found herself utterly captivated by the dark and highly intoxicating aura of the legendary guitar god, sparking a massive, secret liaison. This was not merely a brief and completely hidden mistake conducted strictly in the shadows. In the bizarrely permissive and deeply chaotic ecosystem of 1970s rock royalty, these intense romantic collisions were practically an expected occupational hazard. The incredibly mystical musician effortlessly integrated her into his highly lavish and deeply secretive touring bubble, treating the incredibly fragile concept of marital boundaries as nothing more than a highly laughable illusion. The situation rapidly devolved into a profoundly unnatural and incredibly exhausting psychological game for everyone involved. The original husband was completely aware of the highly passionate, ongoing liaison, but actively chose to maintain a bizarrely passive acceptance, perfectly reflecting the highly toxic and emotionally detached philosophy of their elite social circle. They essentially shared her deep affections, caught in a wildly complex web where nobody wanted to claim ultimate ownership. The immense psychological toll of maintaining such a profoundly complicated and intensely secretive domestic existence eventually began to completely erode the emotional stability of the entire group. The dark and highly mystical guitarist, heavily consumed by his own dangerous personal habits and massive artistic pressures, could not provide genuine emotional safety. The beautifully tragic wife
was left completely drifting between two incredibly distant and profoundly flawed musical giants.
Ultimately, this profoundly exhausting and incredibly dark chapter of shared romance slowly dissolved as the highly extravagant decade finally came to a dramatic close. The legendary musical visionary eventually moved forward into an increasingly isolated and deeply reclusive existence, leaving behind a heavily fractured romantic legacy. It stands as a final, deeply haunting testament to an incredibly wild era, where love was freely traded, yet genuine human connection remained entirely out of reach.